Welcome to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts.
In this podcast, we'll talk about something vital to democracy, the safety and independence of journalists in the European Union. Because truth is, despite the EU's commitment and efforts to protect them and ensure they can do their work free of threats, they're coming under increasing attack, both in Europe and globally. So, stay with us.
Journalists play a central role in democracy, holding power to account, exposing corruption, and keeping the public informed. Yet their safety and independence, also in Europe, are increasingly threatened.
And we're not talking about abstract threats. It's about physical and verbal attacks, online threats, harassment in reprisal for their work, smear campaigns, and even assassinations.
According to the Council of Europe's Safety of Journalists platform and the Media Freedom Rapid Response, 50 journalists have been killed across Europe since 2015, with 1,117 incidents of journalists being targeted or killed in reprisal for their work, reported in 2023 alone, and numbers are on the rise.
War remains a major threat. The Committee to Protect Journalists reports that 2024 has been particularly deadly for journalists working on the front lines. We spoke to their EU representative, Tom Gibson.
Reporting from the front lines of a conflict is one of the most challenging assignments a journalist can undertake. This year has been particularly deadly. 137 journalists and media workers were killed since the war in Gaza began. Journalists covering today's conflicts may confront specialised weapons, indiscriminate shelling, and damaged crucial infrastructure. Essential personal protective equipment may be difficult to obtain on the ground or to transport across borders. What's more, the emotional toll of living in and reporting on a conflict zone can easily affect the mental health of journalists. Journalists are killed with impunity, yet they are civilians and must never be targeted. States must be held accountable for their actions, and as a global press freedom community, we must act to ensure that journalist murders are not allowed to go unpunished.
And let's not forget the 18 journalists who lost their lives in Ukraine since the start of the war in February 2022. As Reporters Without Borders confirms, journalists are sometimes deliberately targeted by military fire despite clearly showing press identification.
These attacks aren't just random acts of violence. Many are deliberate attempts to silence journalists, creating a chilling effect and suppress public debate. And with most cases still unresolved, impunity remains shamefully high.
Against this backdrop, several European initiatives have been set up to monitor the situation of journalists. There's, for instance, the Media Freedom Rapid Response, the Council of Europe's Safety of Journalists platform, or the Media Pluralism Monitor, to mention just a few.
And since 2020, the European Commission's annual Rule of Law reports highlight ongoing risks to media freedom in every member state. Issues range from state surveillance and defamation laws to lack of funding and transparency.
Gender-based violence is another critical concern. Women journalists face disproportionate online harassment, often focused on their personal lives rather than their work. A UNESCO report revealed that nearly 73% of women journalists experience online violence, which can escalate to physical threats.
The European Union sees media freedom and pluralism as fundamental rights, protected by the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights. That's why it's been stepping up its efforts to protect journalists and the valuable work they do. Stay with us.
Proposed in 2022 and adopted 2 years later, the Media Freedom Act aims to ensure and promote media pluralism, transparency of media ownership, and independent journalism free from political, economic, and public or private interference in editorial decisions.
And then there's the SLAP directive. These strategic lawsuits against public participation are used to intimidate journalists with costly, drawn-out legal battles. This directive empowers journalists to fight back, ensuring that justice isn't a privilege reserved for the powerful.
The EU, and the European Parliament in particular, are also fighting to protect journalists against the use of surveillance spyware, such as Pegasus or Predator, especially since the revelations that some EU countries were using such spyware against journalists, politicians, and other public figures.
In fact, the Parliament has been a driving force behind some major initiatives to protect journalists and media freedom. Here's Michela Del Monte from the European Parliamentary Research Service.
Over the years, the European Parliament has called consistently for action to ensure the safety of journalists and media professionals, both inside and outside the European Union. Parliament has expressed its concerns about the progressive erosion of media freedom in Europe and stressed the crucial mission of journalists in gathering and disseminating reliable information.
The European Parliament also highlighted that online harassment, threats, and lawsuits against journalists are on the rise in some member states, and reiterated its concern at the decline of media freedom in Hungary, Poland, and Slovenia.
And let's not forget that every year, as a tribute to the Maltese anti-corruption investigative journalist assassinated in 2017, the Parliament's Daphne Caruana Prize honours reporting that defends EU values like democracy and human rights.
In 2024, it was awarded to Lost in Europe, which reported on the brutal reality of missing children in Europe, with 47 going missing every day.
So there's certainly no lack of initiatives to highlight the crucial work media professionals do in Europe and across the world, and shield them from threats to both their work and their physical integrity. However, as these threats multiply, so too does the need for even greater efforts to protect them. Here's Tom Gibson again.
We should provide all support to journalists working in conflict zones in order to carry out risk assessments, identify potential threats, and prepare equipment, training, and emergency procedures.
Want to know more? Check out the full briefing by Michela Del Monte on the EPRS website or in our app.
This is a European Parliamentary Research Service podcast.
Thanks for listening.